Multimodal Transportation Planning Division with the Chester County Planning Commission. Thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening for what is now our 4th annual Transportation Forum. We also want to thank West Whiteland Township for once again allowing us to hold our forum at this wonderful facility, as they did for our original forum back in 2019. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had our last 2 forums both virtually completely virtually, but now that it's great to have people in the building and meet in person, and also have a virtual aspect to this as we move into the new era of public engagement. With us tonight from the Planning Commission is our Executive Director, Brian O'Leary, Office Manager Beth Cunliffe, our Technical Services Supervisor, Gene Heller, who set up all this technology to allow for this hybrid meeting, and also Nancy Shields, who is handling the registration and the planning for this event. Also, members of our Transportation Planning Division are Steve Buck, Alex Sankarin, and Patty Quinn. And that's us from the Transportation Division. So clear up this screen here. We are being recorded. Everybody knows. So this is our agenda tonight. Before we get started with our program for the evening, it's my pleasure to introduce Chester County Commissioners Marion Moskowitz and Josh Maxwell, who will provide some opening remarks.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. I love transportation of any kind. You see, my first full-time job was in a tractor trailer training school, and I've been in trucking numerous years over my career. So it's kind of ironic that I have a passion for trains and trails and anything that moves in trains. So it's great to be with you tonight for this. Probably if I had continued with the trucking and the tractor trailers, I wouldn't be here today, but this is much more fun because it all comes together. And Commissioner Maxwell and I will just share a couple thoughts we have on trails, transit, and tractor trailers on projects that we've been focusing on for the Planning Commission over the past year. I'll begin by noting the exciting project that brought together 3 counties for a truly unique experience and a great cause, and that's the Schuylkill River Passenger Rail Authority. In April, Berks County, Montgomery County, and Chester County approved this authority to bring back passenger rail service between Reading and Philadelphia, with stops in Pottstown and Phoenixville. And I am pleased to be one of the Chester County representatives, along with Brian O'Leary and Peter Ursler, the mayor of Phoenixville. And what we're going to do is pursue funding opportunities and partner with rail partners like Amtrak to get this going. We're going to work with our federal and state partners and move on to the next crucial step in bringing back this rail service. Just this week, the authority appointed an interim executive director, a Chester County resident and businessman named Tom Frawley, who has an amazing amount of experience in this area, and will certainly take the lead in moving this project forward, providing another option, transportation option for that Route 422 corridor. Over the summer, the region's Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, as it's known, was approved by the DVRPC. The TIP will go into effect in October, and we are excited about the Chester County projects that are included. Addressing the bottleneck traffic congestion at the PA 130 bypass right here in Exton, the 202 expressway intersection at Matlack in Westchester, and the High Street interchange in West Goshen Township. We're also able to bring back funding that was lost to reconstruct the Route 30 bypass in the Coatesville and Downingtown areas. And finally, I can confirm that SEPTA is committed to return regional rail service to Coatesville with a new train station when the new train station is completed in 2025. And while SEPTA is putting together an operating plan to return the service both to Coatesville and to Parksburg, they're also working with Amtrak and the Northeast Corridor Commission to identify and implement the track infrastructure needed to add Ackland to the list of stations to be served. Thank you again for being part of this great event, and I'll turn it over to Commissioner Maxwell.
Thank you, Marion. We're really excited to stop in and chat with all of you tonight. One of the things that I think is really special about Chester County is we have such strong interest from the public when it comes to transportation. That certainly includes trails, that certainly includes open space, that certainly includes the things that Mary mentioned, like rail and other activities that we're doing here in Chester County. And to get that feedback between staff that's excited to talk with people interested in planning in the county and residents and municipal leaders here shows a cooperation that makes Chester County a leader in planning from the county perspective, the municipal perspective, and makes, quite frankly, our jobs a whole lot easier because we get to go out and advocate for the projects that we know you want to see and try and get them funded and make sure they get funded. I'm particularly proud of a couple of projects the staff here at the Chester County Planning Commission has worked on. One is the Complete Streets program. And I'm really excited about this project. I know the Transportation Management Association of Chester County, TMAC. I understand you can't have an agency with an acronym. So TMAC is their acronym. And the idea here is that we have 30% preserved open space throughout Chester County. We have these beautiful small towns and medium-sized boroughs, and we're going to connect them safely for cyclists, whether you're going from Chestland to Westchester, from Phoenixville to Honeybrook, from Kennett Square to Oxford. We're going to try and create thoroughfares for cyclists and people on bikes to be able to get around Chester County very safely. And our planning commission is hard at work trying to get municipalities to accept this program and implement it in their towns so we have safe, complete streets throughout Chester County. Another thing I know Mary and I both care passionately about is making sure that our cyclists out there on those Saturdays and Sunday mornings are safe. And that means educating the people that are driving along our roads and trying to get home to and from work quickly, understand the rules for cyclists on the road and how to make sure that they're safe driving around. So our planning commission, as experts as they are in graphics and marketing, have put together a program that you're going to see on billboards and in materials throughout the county to make sure those of us driving around the county understand that there's cyclists out there and we have a duty to make sure they're safe. We don't want anyone to get hurt in leisure throughout Chester County, certainly if there's anything we can do to stop it. So it's a pleasure for both of us to be here to celebrate the hard work of the Chester County Planning Commission. And to those of you from the public, both here in person and on Zoom around the world, thank you for participating tonight.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Josh. That's great.
The audio.
Okay.
Technical issue. Yes, someone mentioned that the audio is not accurate.
We're good to go? Okay, great. Thanks, Gene. As you can see, we have a pretty full agenda tonight with some great speakers and presentations. We're going to, because of the time of it, we're going to see if we have time available at the end of each presentation for questions and answers. But if not, we're going to pump those all to the end where we'll be addressing them both in person and online. If you have questions in the online world and the Zoom world, please type them into the chat. Is that correct? Question and answer. Yes, the question and answer portion. And we will do our best to address all of those by the time we wrap up at 8:30. Pointing at me. Okay. Okay. Before we get started, though, I would like to let all you know about a few of our upcoming events. We have our Falls Planners Forum on Tuesday, October 18th at the Ent Solutions in Coatesville. That'll be a morning meeting between 8 and 10 o'clock. That's for mostly our planning professionals. On Tuesday, October 25th, we will have our Urban Centers Forum. It's copying off the alliteration we use here in the density, diversity, and discussion. That will be held at the Public Safety Training Campus in South Coatesville. And then finally, for our fall events wrapping up in November 15th, will be our A+ Homes Decoding Housing Performance, which will be held at the Westminster Presbyterian Church in Westchester. Registration for all those events is available through our website, which is chescoplanning.org. Also, we're pleased to announce the return of the Community Planning Master Plan Planner program, which is a great series of courses for local officials and planning professionals alike to learn better how to, all this process works together between, the local officials, the planning commission members, zoning board folks, and how that everything operates under the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code. Registration is available again through, if you can scan this QR code. We also have flyers available in the back here, and that information is also available again on our website. So with that, we are going to kick off our program. The first one of our three larger presentations this evening is being done by one of our newer additions. We have all new staff in the transportation division, but this is our trails planner, Steve Buck. Steve joined us this July and is a landscape architect with over 15 years experience in the private sector, working at a large multidisciplinary firm in Michigan, as well as more recently with a smaller firm here in the Philadelphia area. Steve?
Good evening, everyone. As Brian said, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. And tonight I want to talk to you about an exciting new initiative that we have going on at the Planning Commission, and that's the Chester County Trails Master Plan. One thing though, before we get into this presentation, given that it's still September and school just started, I thought it'd be fun if we could start off with a little pop quiz. Don't worry, there's only 2 questions and they're both multiple choice, so it shouldn't be too hard. Please just think about the answer in your head. You don't need to call out loud, and I won't be calling on anyone. But for our first question, what is the name of the existing 14-mile multi-use trail that runs from King of Prussia in Montgomery County to actually right here in Exton and Chester County? Just take a couple seconds to think about that. Sorry, I don't have license to the Jeopardy music, but you can play that in your own head, I imagine. All right. Oh, sorry, I should read the answer choices too. The Chester Valley Trail, the Struble Trail, the Schuylkill River Trail, or the Chester County Trail. And the answer to that one is the Chester Valley Trail. As a fun little fact, for those who are in the audience tonight, if you look out the window, actually right across the street from here is a link of the Chester Valley Trail. So if you're heading out tonight and want to take a quick peek, I'm sure many of you already know about it, but it's right here, which is a really great resource. For our second question then, what is the name of the planned 800+ mile regional multi-use trail network in the greater Philadelphia region? Is it called the Network, the Delaware Valley Trail System, the Circuit Trails, or the Trail Network of Greater Philadelphia? Just give you a couple seconds to think on that. And our answer to that one is the Circuit Trails. All right, so that's it. The pop quiz is over. Hope everyone learn something new from this, or knew the answers, I should say. But as you can see, our focus tonight is going to be on trails, as we're going to be introducing the Chester County Trails Master Plan. So before we dive into the actual master plan itself, I do just want to provide a little bit of planning context for the development of the Trails Master Plan. In 2018, Chester County adopted Landscapes 3, which is the county's comprehensive plan. Chester County is projected to see continued population and development pressure over the next 20+ years. To guide this development, Landscapes 3 includes strategies and establish a vision where Chester County abounds with healthy natural areas, robust farms, cherished historic sites, diverse housing, thriving businesses, quality education, accessible transportation, and vibrant communities for all. This vision is supported by 6 different goals, listing how we can preserve, protect, appreciate, live, prosper, and connect in Chester County, both now and in the future. The Connect goal specifically deals with Chester County's transportation, communications, and utility infrastructure. One of the objectives of this goal is to provide universally accessible sidewalks, trails, and public transit connections to create an active transportation network within designated growth areas and to develop multi-use trails to interconnect all communities. While the Planning Commission was developing Landscapes 3, we got a lot of feedback regarding trails and active transportation. And I put those on the screen here in those bubbles, and I apologize if they're a little hard to read on the screen. But they included that being able to walk or ride a bicycle in your community is essential. That it's very important to provide safe access to rail trails from communities. And that serious thought and planning should be devoted to providing safe paths all around the county for cyclists. So there is this significant public interest in trail development, and as well as with the goals and objectives of Landscapes 3, this all starts to set the stage for the Chester County Trails Master Plan. So it's important just to have an understanding of what we mean when we say the word trails. I'm sure if I ask multiple people in our audience tonight, either here or online, what do you think of when you hear the word trail? I probably get a decent variety of different responses. For example, some of you may think of a long, straight, a relatively straight pathway that's paved, just like the Chester Valley Trail. Still others may think of, a more secluded, narrow pathway that kind of wanders through some woods or by a lake, like you might find in one of our county parks or state park. Still others may just think about, the local trail that winds through your neighborhood and that you use to go for a jog in the morning or take your dog for a walk. So the truth is that the word trail, it's a broad term that can represent a whole range of different types of facilities. But for the purposes of this presentation, we have the definition there. So a trail is a linear off-road facility with a permanent alignment that is open to the general public and is designed, constructed, and maintained for use of a variety of non-motorized forms of travel. When talking about trails, we can generally categorize them in two big buckets, if you will. The first one are called use-restricted trails. As that name implies, use-restricted trails prioritize one form of travel or user group over another based on one or more specific factors. Factors that could lead to a use-restricted trail include the allowable trail width, the grade or slope of a trail, the trail surface, or the desired programming of the trail. Some examples of types of use-restricted trails include hiking trails, equestrian paths, mountain bike trails, or pedestrian-only pathways. On the other hand, then, we have our multi-use trails. Multi-use trails permit different types of users to use the same trail facility. They typically accommodate bidirectional travel by cyclists, pedestrians, and other non-motorized means. Multi-use trails generally have a recommended width of at least 10 feet. There are some scenarios where they can be a little bit smaller, and they can also be wider too. But they also typically tend to have an improved accessible surface. For this planning focus for the Chester County Trails Master Plan, our primary focus is going to be on multi-use trails as they accommodate the widest range of users and can best support the county's active transportation goals. So when we think of trails, a lot of us may think of trails mainly for recreational purposes, but they do serve a very important transportation, function. Much like our roadway system, trails can connect across borders and provide access to important daily destinations like our schools, parks, and employment centers. When trails lead to our bus stops or train stations, they also then connect to an entire other transportation system, which opens up a lot of mobility centers for people to travel throughout the region. When trails connect to these different types of destinations, they serve as an equitable community resource by providing a transportation alternative instead of needing to rely on the personal automobile for your transportation needs. When different trails are connected, they begin to form a trail network. Trail networks leverage the value of individual trails by creating an interconnected system that results in access to more destinations than any single trail could typically provide. A great example of this is the Circuit Trail system, which we brought up in our pop quiz. The Circuit Trails are a planned 800+ mile regional multi-use trail network in southeastern Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey. Currently, approximately 370 miles of that trail are currently built and exist. And in Chester County, they have trails such as the Chester Valley Trail, the Schuylkill River Trail, Brandywine Creek Trail, Struble, and Euclid trails. Chester County is taking an active role in the development of its regional trails, having recently completed its last remaining portion of the Schuylkill River Trail, and it's working to extend the Chester Valley Trail westward. Montgomery County is currently developing the final link between the Chester Valley Trail and the Schuylkill River Trail, And when that is completed, we'll essentially have a continuous off-road route from, here in central Chester County all the way to Philadelphia. So trails provide many other benefits though, aside from transportation. I'm sure most of you can think about, there are important recreational resources that can contribute to an active and healthy lifestyle. I think also during the pandemic, we saw the important roles that trails and open spaces provided as the use of these spaces surged across the country. Trails can also have a benefit to our economy. In Chester County's Return on Environment, the Economic Value of Protected Open Space report that was published in 2019, a real estate sales analysis showed that homes that were located within a quarter mile of the Chester Valley Trail equated to an average increased property value of over $20,000 per home, as opposed to homes that were outside of that quarter mile buffer. The study also noted that businesses near multi-use trails often promoted their trailside locations to recruit new employees and include as an amenity to help retain workers. And when trails connect to our main streets, our downtowns, shopping areas, commercial areas such as this, they can bring additional customers into this community to help support local businesses. So now that we have some background on the importance of trails, the roles that they play, and what they are, let's transition over to the master plan. So what is a trails master plan and why is it important? At its core, a master plan presents a long-term strategic vision for growth and development. And in this case, we're going to be specifically looking at the county's trail network. Master plans are used to guide and inform decision-making over a multi-year duration, often in both short and long-term planning timeframes. It involves thinking into the future to consider future alternative scenarios, and it lays out the steps that will be required to achieve the desired outcomes. As I mentioned earlier, Chester County is projected to continue to experience significant growth and development in the coming years. And it's important that the Chester County's trail network be planned to support the community both now and in the future. Chester County contains 73 individual municipalities with a diverse mix of landscapes and development patterns, ranging from densely populated urban and suburban centers to significantly rural and agricultural landscapes. Many of these municipalities contain their own trail networks, which could benefit from connections to more regional trail networks in other important community destinations. The Trails Master Plan will look at opportunities to make these connections, fill in existing trail gaps, and connect communities and regional assets to best serve the county's population. So now I'd like to get towards the end and just talk about the project process. So how we're going to plan to get this all done. So the Chester County Planning Commission is going to be leading this effort. However, it's critical that the plan is based on the objectives and priorities of the Chester County community at large. To this end, we'll be working with the project steering committee, comprised of a broad spectrum of stakeholders, including municipalities, friends groups, advocacy organizations, planning, transportation, and funding agencies, and trail users and implementers. For the process, so the master plan is scheduled to run about 18 months, and we framed it out to occur in 5 main phases. During this time, we'll have regular meetings with our steering committee, and we'll also be hosting multiple public meetings and putting out surveys and doing interviews to solicit information from the general public so that there can be input on the ultimate development of the master plan. One of the first steps that we'll be taking is working with stakeholders in the public to develop master plan goals and objectives. This is one of our critical first steps, as it will end up defining the key outcomes that the master plan will aim to achieve. Concurrent with this process, we're collecting various types of data and performing a physical inventory and assessment of the trail network. We've reached out to all the municipalities in Chester County to gather information on their existing and proposed trail networks. We'll also be soliciting information from the various stakeholders, reviewing existing planning documents, and collecting data on trail usage and safety. In addition, we'll be assessing other factors that influence trail development, such as land use, topography, open space, natural and cultural features, and existing infrastructure. Once we have all this information, our next step is going to be performing an analysis to determine where future trails would be the most valuable to the countywide network. To do this, we'll be evaluating proposed trails through a series of criteria developed through public and stakeholder input and based on the overall goals that are established for the master plan. This then will end up in a prioritized list of projects that will then be further analyzed to determine the feasibility of these individual trails. The master plan will also include design and policy recommendations. Given the broad range of project implementers, the master plan will be a resource and provide recommendations on standards and best practices for different types of trail facilities, wayfinding and signage, trail safety and security, maintenance, amenities, and landscaping. Recommendations will also provide information for municipalities on how to implement regulatory tools and amend policy so that trails are an integral piece of the land development process. The recommendations will also include a summary of the top county trail priorities. An implementation plan for these trails will be developed that outlines the overall strategy to develop these individual trails. The master plan will also provide information on funding sources and programs to help facilitate trail development. All this information that we do will end up being compiled in a report. And we'll also be looking at ways that we can make this master plan be a living document. So looking at, not putting things on the web or, are there some other strategies that we can be employing so that people are able to access the master plan, see the overall trails vision for the county, and have this master plan be a true resource for everyone that uses it. So that in summary is what we're going to be embarking on for our trails master plan. Do you want to take questions or keep on moving?
We have a minute or two for a question from the audience at this point. I don't have the questions to you.
Yes.
With respect to the Schuylkill River Valley Trail that was extended up to the Montgomery County line, great job. You get to use it a lot. They said whoever designed it and put it together. One question I had is why do you have the gates cutting off the trail at the beginning of the bridge? Why not get rid of the gate and let the trail users go out onto the bridge and view the river and do the U-turn on the bridge and come back? It just seems like there's 500 feet of nice vista that we just can't enjoy on our U-turn.
Yeah, I think that's controlled by PennDOT. That's not controlled by us. And I think once the trails open on the Montgomery side, that will be open. That trail was built as part of the 422 project many years before we were able to complete ours. And just for safety and liability purposes, I think they want to keep it closed until there's a reason to go on the other side. I know it's not the greatest answer, but it's just not out of our control. So, anyone else?
Brad, what might be the key outcomes out of the master plan? Because I think we have a generally good framework with the circuit. Will it give us priorities in terms of phasing and timing that the county is going to be taking on certain sections, whether it's the Struble Trail extension, the Chester Valley, or beyond, or for the what outcomes really after we put the 18 months in? What do we think we'll really have from that?
I believe one of the goals is really to connect communities into the circuit plan and identifying where those low-hanging fruit are, and really the better trails that can connect more people into the circuit. I mean, the county and working with our partners at DVRPC have been really focusing on the main trunk trails, or as I'd like to say, the interstate highway trails within the county. But working with the local municipalities and having them take on these trails and outlining the plans and the process for how they can do that and take local ownership of making those connections in is something I think it's really important, because I think the county's ability to manage all these, we can't manage the trails all across the county, and it's really something that we're working towards to have community buy-in. Yes.
When does this start? When does the steering start? Because we just actually put in a grant for connecting all our trails in our township.
We started today.
Yeah, we actually had our first steering committee this afternoon. But we are at the very beginning of the process, and we're definitely interested to understand what other studies are out there to make sure that we have the most accurate information as we get going with this process. So, I'd definitely be interested to, get your information and, we can go back and forth and, make sure that we're kind of all thinking towards that same goal. So.
Okay, one more, got time for one more, yes, sir.
How many of the trail links are tied to you working with PennDOT?
We don't know yet. So, I mean, I think we really have to identify which one of those trail connections would be, where the right of way would be located, and, what agencies we may be having to work with. There could be funding that comes through PennDOT, or, funding that comes through the federal government. We do have to work with PennDOT to get review and approval of those designs and everything for that implementation. So PennDOT is a partner in that mostly, especially again for the federally funded ones, but that's to be determined essentially. All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks you, Steve. Right. Now I'd like to introduce Alex Sankarin, who joined the Planning Commission in May. He was one of our first newbies. Alex is a graduate of Westchester University with a bachelor's in urban and environmental planning, and will be managing our public transportation planning efforts moving forward. And he's going to give us a preview of our project we're just kicking off this fall, which is an update to our public transportation plan.
Like Brian said, I'm Alex. Thank you all for coming out. It's super exciting to actually have in-person events like this. That's kind of what I've been waiting for. Only been on the job a few months, kind of done with Zoom meetings, even though that's kind of the way the world works these days, but really nice to have a in-person event as well. So, like Brian said, we're updating the public transportation plan. So the original one was created actually by Brian in 2014, and there was an element of landscapes too. But now we're on landscapes 3. So the county's current comprehensive plan, landscapes 3, was created in 2018. So we're updating the 2014 plan to be more consistent with the guidelines set forth by landscapes 3. The other main thing is we just had a pandemic. We're still not quite out of the pandemic, and we don't know what it's going to look like. That changed public transit a lot. So we're going to adjust some things based on what we already have learned and kind of what we're projecting into the future with this update to the plan. So the connect goal is the main transportation focus for the landscapes 3 document. And there's a couple different recommendations. The pertinent ones here are the 5th one, which is promoting bus service within growth areas, and the 6th one, which is expanding regional rail service. There's some fixed route bus service in Chester County. A lot of people rely on that every day, even throughout the pandemic. However, there's gaps. This document is identifying some of those gaps and is going to help us work with some of the municipal and agency partners to fill those gaps. Additionally, there's a new concept some of you might not be familiar with called microtransit. It's basically like Uber, but run by a transit agency. You have an app, you hail a ride on a bus, the bus has a driver, and it seats, anywhere from 5 to 10 people, and you go door to door. You don't have to, there's no fixed route. That's something that SEPTA is committed to doing, and something that might happen in Chester County. As far as regional rail service, we already, you heard the commissioners talk about extending service to Coachella and Parksburg. That's one of the most important things that we're focusing on, and that's going to continue to be a part of this update. The other one is the developments with the Westchester Metro project. You'll probably hear more about that going into the winter time. That's really just getting its legs now, but that would be for regional rail restoration into Westchester, although not by SEPTA. And the other one would be the School River Passenger Rail Authority, which is of course with Berks and Montgomery counties. So this is our schedule. I used Steve's excellent design, so that's why it looks familiar. Phase 1 work is being done by DVRPC as part of their work program. That's almost done. That should actually be done within the next couple of weeks or so, at which point we will start phase 2. What they've been working on is mostly revising the performance measures. Again, we've learned a lot in 8 years since the last plan was done, so they're updating that. And the ridership, COVID tanked ridership, no two ways about it. Some of it's recovered, Some of it might recover some more, a lot of it won't ever come back. Some of it's guesswork, but we're doing our best to use that to help guide us with the update. SEPTA is also super important because concurrently, while we do this, they are more or less redoing their whole transit agency. The bus revolution is a wholesale redesign of their bus network. There's the existing fixed route service, which we will still have in Chester County, and there's also the micro transit zones. That's a totally new frontier. A lot of places are trying it out with some mixed results, so we'll have to see kind of what happens, but I know that's definitely something that we're excited about here because in lower density areas, it can work a little bit better than fixed route service. As far as the trains, they're also redoing the regional rail network. For us, we're looking at enhancing the Paley Thorndale line service, with the extension to Coatesville, Parksburg, maybe even at Glen, as we talked about earlier, but also just more trains running more frequently, making the service better. The getting 30-minute headways all the way out to Exton instead of stopping at Malvern, which is huge for anyone who lives west of Malvern. So those are, kind of big things that we're looking at and working with SEPTA. Although these aren't this isn't in our court, we just have to advocate for it along with the other municipalities and community leaders and such. So in project details, currently making the steering committee. Hopefully that's done by like next week. So we're really close to kind of kicking this off. 18-month timeline should put us on track for completion around December 2023. And we're going to use the system, environment, and experience framework from the original plan. We have that cool graphic up there. It shows you that while they're distinct entities, they are interconnected, and we have to consider how they sort of relate to each other. The other big thing is equity, underserved communities, kind of social justice is, a much bigger emphasis in the planning community these days. So the original plan didn't have as much of a focus on that. So the update will kind of look at those underserved communities a little bit more, like Coatesville. That's why, again, we're emphasizing that so much, because that's kind of one of the big projects we want to highlight. And this project will let us kind of advocate for it in the best way possible. So with that, do we have time for questions? If there's any?
Yeah, we have time for maybe one question or two. Yes.
Just wondering if you would put into consideration or accommodations for future conditions such as autonomous shuttles and vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, the micro transit might eventually go that way. It's such a new concept right now. It would have a traditional driver, but that's something that, if proven successful, could pivot that way, but certainly not within the next decade, I would think. But
Pretty much.
Well, yeah, we're starting a shuttle down in the Navy Yard later this year, so. I just know there's a lot of infrastructure that has to go around supporting that, so it might be good to think about that and think of that future condition.
Thank you. And thank you, Alex.
All right. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Natasha Manbeck. Natasha is a senior project manager for McMahon Associates with almost 20 years of experience in transportation planning and design. Natasha leads a broad range of transportation plans, feasibility evaluations, and conceptual design projects that involve the coordination of land use and transportation systems. As both a licensed engineer and certified planner, she has a passion for working with communities to improve walking, biking, and transit. Natasha oversaw development of the Building Better Bus Stops Resource Guide for the Pennsylvania Public Transportation Association and PennDOT. And before McMahon, she served as the Director of Transportation Services for the Chester County Planning Commission. Natasha?
I'm all right. Good evening. Great to see you all, and great job to Brian. I know what it's like to be in your position, and you do a great job, not only tonight, but all the time advocating and helping transportation. So thanks for all that you and your team do. Great to be with you all. I've been on a bit of a road show on building better bus stops. So the presentation tonight will be very brief. I've done an hour presentation on building better bus stops. So you're just getting a taste, but hopefully it's enough to inspire you to go online and look at the full Building Better Bus Stops resource guide and use something out of the guide in your work to build better bus stops. So the guide, how many of you are familiar with SEPTA's bus stop design guidelines? Couple hands. So we're in the SEPTA service area. That guide was developed by DVRPC. It is an excellent resource. You should continue to use it. And it has a lot of great tips and strategies and design guidelines for bus stops. But SEPTA is one of over 30 different transit agencies in Pennsylvania. And so not every transit agency had a guide like SEPTA's. And PennDOT and PPTA, which is the Pennsylvania Public Transportation Association, realized that there was this gap, that a lot of transit agencies didn't have bus stop design guidelines available. And also there weren't a lot of resources available for incorporating bus stop planning into municipal plans. So they supported development of the Building Better Bus Stop resource guide. It covers planning and design for fixed route bus stops. And we focused a lot on suburban and rural contexts, which aren't typically the focus of bus stop design guides. How many of you have seen bus stops that look like image on the screen here, where it is a sign on the side of the road that I have to circle so that you see that it is a bus stop sign? And this is what most bus stops look like. And no offense to T-Mac, you guys do a great job. You're not alone. Most bus stops across Pennsylvania look like this. They lack sidewalks. They lack crosswalks. They are difficult to get to and from. And there's limited space and supportive infrastructure for waiting passengers. People are waiting in puddles and in ditches and on steep slopes. And they're located in a very constrained area between the edge of the roadway and the land use. This gray zone has utilities, signs, and no one knows who owns it. It is, so I guess I want to start by saying bus stops seem so simple, but they are very complicated to improve. And they're not easy. And so one of the themes you'll hear is it takes partnerships and it takes commitment and leadership to really get anything done. But we know that enhanced bus stops are relatively low cost in the scheme of things, and they can have a really significant impact on safety and access and ridership and even transit operations. So the resource guide gives some strategies to address some of these challenges. In addition to the physical constraints that I just talked about, there are a number of approval constraints and requirements. Every bus stop might have different requirements associated with zoning and the local municipality where it may be, associated with whether it's on a state road or a local road, and if you need PennDOT's involvement, whether you need a private property owner to be engaged. The requirements may depend upon the type of improvements, the funding sources, and it is difficult because a lot of people don't work on bus stops every day, and so they might not be as familiar with all of the requirements associated with how to design and approve and permit a bus stop. So challenges abound, but luckily, we have a village to take care of these issues, and it takes one. Every entity on the screen here, from municipalities to public transit agencies to MPOs, PennDOT, planners and developers, and the community members all have a role to play, and the success comes when everyone can work together. So the rest of my presentation will give an overview of the resource guide. Part one is planning and policy resources. And I will say, for those of you familiar with the SEPTA guide, this is not something that's covered in SEPTA's guide. Part 2 is design resources. Part 3 is bus stop typologies, which is some common types of bus stop designs. And for those of you that want the quick reference, we have one. It's a 10-page summary, so you don't have to read all 100 pages of the bus stop design guide. So I'm going to start by giving a quick overview of some of the planning and policy resources. First, transit is very closely related to land use, and the success of transit depends upon a number of aspects of land use design, whether it's the mix of land uses, the density, the bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, parking, and bus stops. So the Building Better Bus Stop Guide includes a number of strategies on how to incorporate transit into a number of different types of municipal planning documents. So this never happens in Chester County, but it might happen somewhere else in the state where, let's say, a new warehouse, a new commercial center, or residential development is built. And then someone calls the transit agency and says, hey, we really need transit to get our employees to work, or we have residents who need transit. And the transit agency looks at the development and says, you're not on our route. You were never designed to accommodate transit. We can't get a bus in or out. You have no pedestrian infrastructure to support people getting from the front door to the bus stop. And transit in that case is an afterthought. So the purpose of the guide is trying to get people to think about transit up front in the planning process. And you can do that in every step of the planning process. We had great presentations about upcoming plans by the Planning Commission where you saw it. You evaluate existing conditions, you identify future needs, and you develop recommendations. And you can think about transit and incorporate that in every step of that process. And it can be fun. The great thing about bus stops is they work well with other strategies that you might have in your community. Maybe it's gateways or placemaking, streetscapes, historic. I have a picture later in the presentation, a play stop that has playground infrastructure that was incorporated into the bus stop. It was a partnership with the health agency, and it's a great looking stop. And it took a partnership, but the end result is a creative design approach and solution that is not only a bus stop, but it's a community asset. So if anyone is representing a municipality out here tonight, I give you a challenge. Appendix A of the Building Better Bus Stops Guide has model ordinance language for zoning and saldo. It includes common definitions and a number of other requirements for coordinating with transit agencies, specific design guidelines. So take it as a starting point, but tailor it to what your community needs. It's been done by Lower Merion. It's been done by Susquehanna Township. It'd be great to have a Chester County municipality take a look at the municipal ordinance and figure out how it works best in their community. Appendix B is a plan review checklist. So for any planner or designer out there, you can use this as you're reviewing, doing your Act 247 review or another review to check to see whether the plan has considered transit and has the requirements for an ADA compliant bus stop. SEPTA went a step further, took Appendix B and developed their own Building Better Bus Stops checklist. It's part of their Transit Supportive Community Development Initiative. So since we're in SEPTA's service area, I encourage you to use that checklist instead. And it's the way that they're helping to coordinate with developers. So often I get, well, it's great to talk about planning, Natasha, but we want to implement something. We want to get it done. The best way to implement and improve bus stop is to do it as part of another project. I talked about how difficult they are. But when you're doing an intersection improvement, when you're doing a land development project, it's a lot easier to do. There's a great example up on the top of the screen. That bus shelter is up in the Phoenixville area. It was implemented, paid for by a developer, no cost to the municipality. The bottom image is thanks to DVRPC, and it is a shelter that was purchased by a Rotary and was agreed to be, I believe, installed and maintained by the municipality. So you can see how public-private partnerships can be really effective for bus stops. Good news, there's a lot of funding out there in some senses. There's federal funding, there's state funding, there's regional funding, there's private funding. But honestly, you can have all the funding in the world. It takes people. You need people who are committed to getting it done, because it's a lot of steps to get through the process of a better bus stop. So now we're going to move into design and get a crash course on bus stop design. So these design principles shouldn't be surprising to everyone. A big theme is accessibility. Transit is a lifeline for many of our community members who do not have access to a car. So having an accessible bus stop is very critical. We want it to be safe and convenient, visible, easy to identify, so I don't have to circle it on the slide so you know it's a bus stop. Every transit rider is most likely a pedestrian, and so we need to think about when they step off that bus, how are they getting to or from their final destination? And of course, it always helps to have amenities. So the guide includes steps for planning and designing a bus stop. So there might be a number of reasons that you identify the need for a bus stop. This, I want to emphasize, the most important thing is coordinate with the transit agency, talk to SEPTA. They have a lot to say in terms of how a new stop, a relocated stop, may impact their overall operations. The other thing I want to emphasize is, even if SEPTA says, we can't stop there now, it doesn't make sense to have a stop there now, there's things that can be done. You can consider reserving right-of-way, or why not just build the pedestrian infrastructure? Other people are going to use it for other purposes. A bus stop can potentially be added in the future. The guide includes a number of questions to ask when you're evaluating bus stop locations. The one thing I want to stress, I'm going to show a number of images. All of the images show one bus stop, but I want you to look down at your feet. You are wearing two shoes. Bus stops are like your shoes. They come in pairs. So when someone is taking the bus to a location, they will get off, go to their final destination. Most likely, they will make a return trip on the bus and need to cross the street to catch the bus in the other direction. That's not in all cases, but in many cases. So we have to think about the connection between the paired bus stops. It's really important from a planning perspective. So I don't want you to get off by seeing just one image on a lot of the graphics. Up front, think and talk about the permissions, agreements, and maintenance. If it's going to be in PennDOT's right-of-way, they have a transit shelter right-of-way agreement if you're going to have a shelter. But you really need to get the transit agency, the owner of the right-of-way, whether that's public or private, on board, and agreements in place for who's going to own and maintain the infrastructure. So there are three key typical locations for a bus stop. Far side, which is after proceeding through an intersection. That's the most common and desirable from a transit agency perspective. It gets the bus through an intersection, and it allows the pedestrian activity to happen kind of after the bus leaves. It also avoids conflicts with right turns. That's what happens at a near side stop. However, near side stops can be used when there's a key transit generator, and they work better, particularly with bump outs or curb extensions, which I'll show on the next slide. Mid-block are often used when there's a key transit generator in between. So now you know the general, the placement. So think about the configuration. Roadside or curbside is what you see most times. It could be in the travel lane, a parking lane, or on a shoulder. But a curb extension, as you can see in the picture, provides a little bit more space for waiting passengers as well as amenities. And there are opportunities sometimes for bus bays where that allows the bus to get out of the travel lane, especially if they have a longer layover. So I'm going to walk through some of the bus stop elements, which are kind of on the roadside, and the features for the passengers. So one of the fundamental elements and probably least understood elements of a bus stop today is an ADA loading pad. That's shown in image number 1. You don't walk around and you don't see a blue square outside, you see a sidewalk. So the purpose of the ADA loading pad is shown on the bottom images, is the bus will have a ramp that is typically deployed from the front door to provide accessibility, particularly for mobility impaired wheelchair users. You want that ramp to be at an appropriate slope to comply with ADA. And so you want it to be deployed at curb height. So an ADA loading pad is not an ADA curb ramp, and this is where terminology is really important. The top image is from the Lehigh Valley. They were coordinating with a developer and said, we need an ADA loading pad. They put in a depressed curb, which is the complete opposite of what is needed for an ADA compliant loading ramp. So in addition to the loading pad, most bus stops, they all have a sign. It tells you what route, what the service is. That's a fundamental feature. There are a number of amenities that can be provided, shelters, benches. You got to think about how people get from the shelter to the ADA loading pad, as well as through the stop. And this has become a little bit more important with COVID is rear door, making sure that you don't have a tree planted where the rear door of the bus is opening. Here is that image of the play stop that I referenced in York. And again, bus stops are opportunities to make a public community gathering space. So trash receptacles, bike parking can all enhance that. Part 3 of the Building Better Bus Stop Guide has typologies. They show bus stops in rural and suburban areas, as well as more urban. And we also include a lot of information for suburban stops that may be within a site. So within a commercial center, within a retail center. You can look at those more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natasha. That was a great presentation. Next up is our newest addition to the Transportation Division, Patty Quinn. Patty graduated from Westchester University with a master's in urban and regional planning and was most recently working with the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. Patty will be managing programs related to our major roadways and assisting with the project programming and funding processes with our partners at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. Patty?
Brian?
Thank you all for coming tonight. Like Brian said, I am the newest of the transportation planning team with Chester County, and I'll be focusing on improving our roads and highways. So in January, we're going to start the county's transportation programming and delivery process updates. So from this graphic, you can sort of see how much different planning processes go into actually getting projects into construction and funded. So if you're ever wondering why something's taking so long, this is a great graphic to sort of reflect on. So this process takes place every 2 years and it creates an inventory of projects. And that inventory is based on municipal outreach and talking to our community and other stakeholders and sort of getting a list of their needs first and foremost and their desires after that. So then from there, that inventory will be the basis for seeking funding either by inclusion on the Transportation Improvements Program or the TIP, which is administered by the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, or DVRPC for you acronym lovers out there. And basically, anything sort of that wouldn't be in the TIP, we at the county serve as an advocate to sort of connect you with the right funding for that project. So the first step in this sort of inventorying projects is the TII, or the Transportation Improvement Inventory. And so once our communities have identified projects, I assist by fostering connections to grant funding that can help bring these projects to fruition. So in the past, Chester County has been fortunate to receive a wide variety of grant funding. For instance, we have some municipalities have taken advantage of the Multimodal Transportation Fund, which brought $6.2 million in funding last year. And Greenlight Go program, which is also a PennDOT funded grant. That provided $1.1 million to some municipalities in Chester County last year. And then the Automatic Red Light Enforcement, or ARLE program, contributed almost $1 million to 3 municipalities in 2018. And those are just a few. There's a lot of really good grants that we can connect our planning partners, communities, and municipalities with. And I think that these programs are an important part of achieving the vision of Landscapes 3, and more specifically, the Connect goal. So they're key in advocating the funding and implementation of transportation improvements. And these projects are recommended by stakeholders and communities, and they're important to goals like meeting travel needs and reducing congestion, which we all deal with all the time. Providing access to alternative modes of transportation. And that's important as our world changes sort of rapidly around us, right? And so another important part of our transportation programming that will begin in January 2023 is the update to our transportation priority projects. These projects have a more significant impact on how we experience Chester County. Many of them will improve things like safety and efficiency of our daily commute, our access to public transportation alternatives, and our enjoyment of our beautiful surroundings through bikeways and trail extensions like the ones Steve had mentioned earlier today. And I look forward to getting to work with all the municipal officials and stakeholders as these programs move forward this year in 2023. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Patty. Batting cleanup tonight is Kristen Scudder from the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. Kristen is the freight program manager at DVRPC, where she works closely with member governments, local communities, and private sector industry to inform and advance transportation projects that support a safer, more efficient freight system and livable communities. Prior to her work at DVRPC, Kristen was a structural engineer responsible for engineering, design, and materials management on global infrastructure projects. Kristen has a Master of City Planning from the University of Pennsylvania and a Bachelor of Science of Civil Engineering from the University of Southern California. Kristen.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Brian, for that introduction. DVRPC has been working with the Chester County Planning Commission on the Chester County Freight Plan. And while the final product has not been published yet, it is in the process. And so today I wanted to take the opportunity to share some of our study findings and also share a little bit about what you can expect to see in that report when it comes out. This study originally came out of an action item from the Landscapes 3 comprehensive plan as part of the Connect goal that focuses on transportation. The action item itself is to conduct a study of freight service areas of concern to improve service while minimizing impacts. Now, given Chester County's proximity to the Delaware River ports, to Philadelphia International Airport, not only are the county's roadways and rail systems critical to local and regional goods movement, but they're also really important for national and international goods movement as well. So in undertaking this study, we really wanted to, one, paint a good picture of what freight looks like in the county, identify areas of concern around freight movement, and offer recommendations to improve freight operations, as well as strategies and recommendations for mitigating the impacts on local communities to specifically ensure the safe and efficient movement of both goods and people on the county transportation infrastructure. So I want to do a quick thank you to all the team members that have been working on this project with us. At DVRPC, we have myself, Mike Ruane, Kendra Nelson, and Ann Nygaard that have been working on the freight plan. And Brian and the Chester County Planning Commission have been our project sponsors. But we've also had a good mix of both public and private partners on our steering committee that helped to guide the scope of the project, as well as the deliverables that would be most useful for the communities to see. And to kind of lay out the scope of how the plan is set up and how our work has been conducted, the freight plan was broken out into 2 phases. And the first phase was really focused on industry outreach, identifying where freight is in the county, and developing a county freight profile that really depicts that movement. And phase 2 for the freight plan was really focused on, defining a set of freight goals for the county, and outlining an action plan with actions that can be taken by both the municipalities and the counties going forward to address freight movement. So I'll take a quick step back. Why is it important that we talk about freight, right, in our transportation network? I'm sure each and every one of us has had the experience of getting stuck behind a truck on the road or being blocked by a truck while you're going somewhere. But there's a lot more to freight movement than just that. And what we see across the region really is that in all communities, right, we face a disconnect in understanding between the role of goods movement in the community, why it exists there, and why trucks are moving through the places that we live and work. Unlike things like transit or other modes of transportation that we take, we're not actively, or most of us are not actively engaged with freight on a daily basis. But the reality behind freight and goods movement is that it supports the businesses that drive our economy. It also supplies the goods that make our communities livable. So goods coming to retail stores, goods coming to restaurants, institutions, and even the packages that are delivered to your homes. And if we didn't realize it before, the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely shown us, how disruption in these freight supply chains and freight movements can really impact our everyday lives. So this is part of the reason why it's important for us to understand where freight is moving in the community, and plan for it. So to start by identifying what freight looks like in the county, we really wanted to identify the largest generators of freight activity. And we can do that by looking at different industries and separate out consumption industries like office buildings, hospitals, schools that absolutely rely on freight, but don't necessarily rely on the same levels of volumes of freight that, say, some of our more freight intensive industries do. And so when I mention freight intensive industries, I'm talking about those that work in extraction, like mining and agriculture, industries in production, like manufacturing, and industries like distribution. Those are your warehouses and your transportation companies. So as part of the Chester County Freight Plan, we really wanted to take a closer look at what these major freight intensive industries were in the county specifically. And these are the 7 industries that we've defined in Chester County as being those major generators. And in identifying their impact, we looked at what their GDP was, their location quotient, the products that they're moving, and also the primary transportation mode that they're using to transport goods. And the reality is that most of these industries are using trucks as their primary mode for transportation. And in some of our industry outreach, we heard that that is probably going to remain the case. However, we do see a fair amount of rail activity in the county. And given the limited amount of rail right-of-way that is actually in Chester County, there's a lot of industries that are still using it and relying on it. So that's an important part of some of these industries' business. From an infrastructure perspective, we of course also want to understand what are the facilities that all of these industries are using. So just some quick facts about general freight infrastructure across the county. There are 26 miles of interstate routes, 160 miles of national highway network, 108 miles of freight trackage, and 5 rail yards and intermodal terminals across the county. So this is a significant and diverse set of freight infrastructure that the county can rely on to support its businesses and freight transportation. But a second part of this freight infrastructure and identification, there are also 7 DVRPC designated freight centers within Chester County. And these freight centers really represent concentrations or clusters of freight intensive activity, like I mentioned earlier, and centers of employers for those businesses. So there are 7 of these centers. They range from high-tech manufacturing centers to more local manufacturing and distribution clusters. And there's also one heavy industrial center in Coatesville that I'll give you a little bit more of a preview in just a minute. As a part of the freight plan, we wanted to kind of delve into these clusters of freight intensive activity and paint a more detailed picture of the characteristics that we see at these freight centers, with the hopes that it'll also act as a resource for municipalities to better understand how these freight centers are moving goods. So we identified what the primary mode of transportation was and what that breakdown is between medium and heavy trucks. Medium trucks being more of your box trucks and heavy trucks being more of your tractor trailers. And using INREX GPS trace data, we were also able to identify some of the main roads that trucks are using to access these areas. So we did this for each of the freight centers. These profiles will all be in the final freight plan report. And lastly, we looked at these freight centers, but they don't represent all of the freight movement across the county. So we used the same GPS truck trace data to look at general truck trips and paths around the county, not just at those freight center locations. And so what you see here are 2 maps, one of heavy truck trips and one of medium truck trips. And the patterns that we saw across the county when looking at these truck movements were that most heavy trucks are really staying on your larger facilities, your larger highways, and limited access roads. Medium truck trips, however, are what you're seeing disperse more on the local network across the county. So it helps us to better understand what types of trucks we might expect to see on which facilities across the county. So, like I mentioned earlier, for the second phase of this project, we really moved into outreach, community outreach, and we wanted to identify issues of concern across the county and hear from the public to get a better picture of where some of these efforts should be concentrated. We used a web map, which you can see here, and some extensive social media outreach to get people to tell us about the issues and concerns that they have with freight in their communities. And we were able to get over 100 comments. And what we found was that there were a couple of themes that we heard over and over again from a lot of the respondents during this outreach. I won't go through all of them today, but I'll try to highlight a couple of them. There were a lot of concerns around rural roads having limited visibility for trucks. And this is especially dangerous for cyclists who are also trying to use those roads, as we've heard earlier today. We heard about some high congestion points, specifically along US 30, but also at the intersection of US 30 and 100. We heard that trucks can disrupt small main streets, affecting the community character in some of the borough areas. And also that there were specific intersections that people felt could use better signals, better signage, better designated turn lanes for truck access. So it was good to see that there were a couple of themes that really came out across the county and a couple of issues that we can focus on as a part of this plan to address. So taking all of those comments into consideration, as well as kind of the data analysis and freight profile that we created as part of phase one, our steering committee came up with a freight action plan. And as a committee, we defined 6 main goals to focus on. And these were aligned with the county priorities that we see in previous plans, and especially in Landscapes 3, but with a freight focus on how the county and municipalities can address freight issues. So I'll go into a little detail again, not going through all of the strategies. The first of our goals was safety, with the aim to support and implement freight safety improvements and initiatives across the county. And one of the strategies and recommendations that came out of this goal that I'll highlight was the designation of a primary truck route network, so that design recommendations that protect all road users, not just trucks, can be made for the appropriate level of truck traffic that we see on some of these facilities. The second goal that came out of our action plan was efficiency. And this goal really aims to increase the efficiency of goods movement and maintain reliable mobility for trucks. Again, we had a lot of strategies and recommendations for how this can be implemented, but a couple to point out include investing in transportation infrastructure that supports freight movement, and identifying priority projects for that investment to go into. The third goal was preservation and identity, which aims to educate about freight that supports agriculture as a vital industry and county identity, and to support industrial redevelopment opportunities that promote and preserve open space. We again had a bunch of strategies, but one that kind of was a little bit different from that a lot of our steering committee members hadn't considered before, was looking to identify more opportunities for industrial business access to rail. And this can preserve open space by kind of concentrating freight intensive businesses where they actually have access to some of this infrastructure, and encouraging that development in concentrated areas instead of going into other open space areas around the county. Our next goal was environmental, which aims to encourage new technologies and infrastructure investments that offer more sustainable options for freight transportation and freight efficiency. One of the recommendations to support this goal is to encourage municipalities to update municipal ordinances to consider truck parking and queuing needs in proposed new developments. And what kind of including these considerations in an ordinance would do would limit the amount that trucks are idling and queuing, and help to get them to their destination faster, so we don't have engines running when they don't need to be. I'll quickly go through the rest of these. Our next goal was economic development, which really aimed to support industrial redevelopment opportunities and infrastructure for economic growth. One of the strategies was to promote redevelopment at vacant or underutilized sites at existing freight centers. These freight centers already have pretty decent access to transportation infrastructure as well as workforce access. So it's a prime opportunity for development and expansion. And then lastly, community in place. This goal really aims to coordinate with communities to ensure that the mobility for trucks is consistent with their regional and local priorities as a community. One of the strategies for helping to implement this goal is to incorporate complete streets recommendations that consider truck movements in urban areas. It's important to plan and to know where trucks are moving, and if they're there, to make sure that other road users are safe in and around them. So what we found was that there were a lot of common strategies and recommendations that came from our goals. So we decided to kind of take some of the next steps to provide a base level of information that can be used for advancing some of these recommendations. So we took, a step to further analyze some of the major road facilities in Chester County to better identify what the characteristics were and what the truck traffic was on these roads, to kind of set the county up for the potential to designate a freight network in the future, to have the information that they need to understand what's happening on these facilities in terms of freight traffic. And then another follow-up to the recommendations that we saw kind of consistently across the goals was identifying projects that are already addressing some of these concerns. And what we found was there are a couple of projects that are already on the Pennsylvania tip that are working to address some of these concerns that we heard from the public, especially some of the intersection and interchange improvements that were being requested. And then lastly, for those projects that are not already in the works, we identified funding opportunities not only for implementation, but also for further planning efforts that can help to advance some of these recommendations and strategies. So I will end it there. I know that was a lot to kind of cover, but I hope that hopefully it spurred some of your interest to go and read the plan when it does come out, and you'll have a better idea of what to expect from that report. So thank you all very much.
Question?
Okay, yeah, okay, we're gonna kick off the question and answer phase now, yes. You have a question for Kristen?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, that's got it, Rick.
I can't believe I never noticed these, but freight stations. What are they? Who runs them? How are they established?
What do you mean by freight station?
Well, I don't know. You showed
freight
me a map
centers.
of freight stations.
That's my question too. Are there 5? Did you say there are 5 freight clusters?
So freight centers. Yes, there are 7 in Chester County. They have been defined and established by DVRPC. And there is a methodology of looking at land use, employers, transportation infrastructure, that kind of focuses on identifying where these freight centers are.
Who operates them?
They're just effectively,
So
they're
they're
just.
planning areas is what they are.
Generators,
What?
clusters of freight generators.
So they're planning areas. There's not a single operator for any of them, but we use them for.
I'm envisioning a depot or something.
No, sorry. To clarify, they're planning designated areas. We use them to better understand where major freight generators are across the region. Because they tend to cluster together, and they cluster together, one, for efficiencies between different businesses, but also because those locations tend to have really great access to transportation infrastructure that they all need.
So I assume they have names.
Ray,
They have arbitrary names, mostly numbers at this point.
Coastal with the steel
Mhm.
is probably one of them, and then Flower Foods in Oxford.
Yep, that is also there's a freight center over in that area as
How
well.
about Parksburg?
I don't know.
They used to be coming into the warehouses by Green Giant.
I think there is a freight cluster there as well. Yes.
Now, are there
yes.
any east of Coatesville on the main line, and are there any on the Schuylkill Valley line that runs today?
I was going to say, can I pull back up my map really quickly? I don't want to take too much of our question time. I know we're near the end here.
That's good.
Got it?
These are those 7 freight centers across Chester County.
Could you read this?
So what we've identified here are just the type of centers that they are. So what I can tell you, we have a high-tech manufacturing cluster up here, a local manufacturing and distribution cluster right here. We have kind of very close to each other next to Coatesville, a heavy industrial cluster and a high-tech manufacturing cluster. Another high-tech manufacturing cluster, local manufacturing and distribution, and local manufacturing and distribution. So they don't have specific names for each cluster. We have a numbering system that we use to keep track of them. But more than anything else, they're really they're planning areas for us to better understand that we know there are a lot of freight intensive businesses here. And therefore, we can expect to see a lot of freight traffic coming to and from these
So
areas.
that, does that mean then that I can bring materials in or out of those locations presently, or that is the plan? I know some of them we can.
There are currently businesses there that are doing that, yes.
Okay.
Question, obviously with the pandemic, a lot of warehousing has emerged out of the change in the market. Maybe not, maybe for you, maybe for Brian or Brian O'Leary. How big of a land use threat, or how much is Chester County in the path of the warehousing demand from your perspectives?
That one, I don't think we're the main place for it, but we had, you know, square feet. What's that? I'll go over here.
So we had a couple million square feet coming in at the Route 100 Turnpike interchange. So that's been our biggest project that we've seen. We do have a warehouse proposal on the old brownfield industrial site in Westchester. At one point, it was going to be an Amazon distribution center. They pulled out immediately. Another project came in with more square footage. I don't remember the number, but probably a few hundred thousand square feet. And of course, they do a pile right there with all the trucks right there. We got, you know, around the corner, we got the UPS up in West Goshen distribution facility. We just saw a very small warehouse. We're getting small ones too. A 13,000 square foot facility just came in I think it's West Goshen also, right north of kind of near where the Chester County Hospital is. So we're getting lots of small ones in. We're getting a lot of industrial proposals, and most of our industrial proposals, including manufacturing, are in the central or western portion of the county, kind of along the Route 30 corridor. So we've definitely been seeing an increase in proposals. Last year alone, I believe we had about 3 million square feet of industrial proposals and warehouse proposals. Not as big this year, but that's a big number for Chester County. That's high square footages. So we are expecting the freights to increase needs. And go back to you. What's under? For instance, in manufacturing, International Paper took an old property. There was a steel plant in Valley Township. There was a Schramm Drills near Westchester was expanding. We had a playground manufacturing company come in. And that's just a handful of stuff we've seen. Very, very big shift.
Yes, sir. I have a question for Natasha. The bus shelters. Historically, municipalities and private owners have been a pain at times in allowing the actual shelters to be constructed on their property. So 2 questions. Is that any better? And the second part is, if we wanted to get a shelter in an area, how do we go about doing it? The example is, although I live in Westchester, I'm also often out in the West Goshen area by the shopping center. There's no shelter on the privately owned shopping center side. And across the street, there is no shelter on an individual's private right of way. How does one, whether West Goshen or somewhere else, how does one go about trying to get a shelter at an existing bus stop?
You want me to take that or you?
Yeah.
Good luck directly to you, yeah.
Ready to come up?
Yeah, we could, I'll try to answer while she's on her way. Well, Natasha's on her way up. there.
First of all, I asked Randy to not ask me any hard questions today, and he didn't. He promised not to ask me about bus shelters,
Because they are the hard questions. So within the SEPTA service area, you know, starting off point, SEPTA has a policy of not owning shelters. So that's ground zero. So the transit agency is out of the picture as an owner of the shelter. So the key to how do you get a shelter is finding who will be who will take on ownership of that shelter. And that historically in Chester County, that has come about through ad agencies. Clear Channel, I believe, is the one that owns most of the shelters that you see in Chester County today. And they have done that, I believe, by contracting with municipalities. So that's one model. I don't know, and Tim might know more, or Brian might know more. I'll pass it off.
Okay. I think through our original public transit plan, we identified what bus stops had shelters. And we also have ridership info that we had at that point in time. And as well as, the more up-to-date information we're getting, from SEPTA. And what we're trying to do is identify the bus stops that have the highest number of boardings. So that we can identify, more heavily used bus stops that would make better use of shelters. Alex and I have been working with a couple of municipalities, including Westchester Borough and also Phoenixville, that have those stops that we know that are not going to significantly change with the bus revolution that we mentioned earlier, because when they throw everything up in the air with where the buses are going to go, it's really difficult to identify where those sites are going to be. But we have a couple sites going, and we're working on a pilot program to be able to provide bus shelters for those sites. And the general concept is that we would work with them to provide them with a shelter in exchange for a long-term maintenance agreement, which is usually what is the big issue in having those shelters put in place. Yes.
So to the response to some of the bus stop components, I'm a municipal employee. I have the benefit of not having any of my elected officials here, and I'm going to say to the elected officials, we got to step up and take ownership of some of these bus stops. The local municipality, we've got local public works forces that can maintain them. I think the biggest thing with bus stops is the maintenance. I mean, after we get past the footprint and where it can go, building it's easy. It's just aluminum, plexiglass. The hard part is maintaining them over the years, getting the snow out of them, fixing the broken glass, cleaning the garbage out of them every so often. And what I hate hearing is make SEPTA do it or make PennDOT do it. PennDOT is in King of Prussia, SEPTA is too spread out, whereas local municipalities, we're here. None of us are bigger than, say, 13 square miles, so it's like 5 miles in any direction. So I just, to the elected officials, kind of consider, hey, own it, and it's good for the retail, and it's good for the residents.
So the best time to do bus shelters is when there's a development or a redevelopment occurring in those places. That's when that has to occur. And has to be a relationship between private property and the municipality in that nature. SEPTA or TMAC will get involved. Becomes a service issue to make sure that the bus stop is sited in the right spot and it can be employed there. Then PennDOT gets involved if it is part of the in the right of way or not. And so there are several layers of planning this, and that's why it comes back to the key component is when the development or the redevelopment is going in our rural or our suburban setting for our bus shelter designs.
Tim, I would only add to it that it also starts when said municipality has taken either the ordinance out of the Natasha's guidebook or the ordinance out of the county's most active transportation inventory and actually codified it, because then it doesn't become just an add-on. It's just like the requirement, are you going to add sidewalks? It's in the ordinance. Yes, I'm doing it. But when a well-written ordinance just says you're putting a bus shelter in here as a requirement through the saldo, it doesn't become just a optional discussion. It becomes a requirement, and it takes a lot of the guessing work and negotiation out of the equation.
We had a municipality recently wanting to put in a bus shelter in a new development that was going in. Unfortunately, what happened with that particular location, as Natasha put it, bus stops have to come in pairs. And when they come in pairs, you have to look at where the crosswalk is going to be when you drop off a passenger on a return trip, when they're going to be on the opposite side of the road. And there was not enough pedestrian connection between the development and the opposite bus stop on that. So those are things, again, when we're looking at the review process, that needs to occur.
Okay.
And on the reverse of that in Westchester, I think our newest bus shelter is church housing at the Melton Center complex. They, I guess, the borough may have asked them to put in the shelter, but that's a one-way street out. So they didn't have to worry about having a shelter on the other side of the street, which is Gay Street into town. But so we did, that's our newest shelter, I think, in Westchester.
Yep. Great. I do have one question online related to bus shelters I'd just like to address. And the question is, does advertising on bus shelters require outdoor advertising permits from PennDOT? I don't know the specific answer to that, but a lot of the bus shelters that you do see through Clear Channel are essentially billboards themselves. That's what the company does, being Clear Channel. They maintain those shelters and also change out the advertising. So I could be wrong, but I would say that it's part of the bus shelter has to have a highway occupancy permit from PennDOT, which I would assume a lot of that information would be required, but
PennDOT has a shelter agreement. That's a specific shelter agreement.
Okay.
For shelters within their right of way.
Great. So that answers that one. And we have, I'm gonna go back and forth between here and online. Do we have any questions here in the group? Yeah, I got one more question, and this is probably a question for Kristen. For the purpose of freight planning, are pipeline facilities considered? Yeah.
So pipelines are definitely part of the freight network in the county, and we did take a high level look at where they are, but because of their limited interaction with the highway network and the rail network within the county, we did not go into a deep delve into the pipeline network as a part of this plan.
Makes sense. Thank you, Kristen. Okay, I don't have any more questions online. Anybody else here in attendance have any additional questions for the planning commission or anyone else? Well, great. Thank you all for coming out tonight and attending this. I think we had a great round of presenters here and covering a pretty diverse range of our transportation issues. And thanks again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
And your cookies over here.
Oh, yeah, there's refreshments back there too. Yes, thank you.
I got it.